You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast.
Hello, I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is author Mag Diamond, the award-winning author of Bowing to Elephants, Tales of a Travel Junkie, which hit number 1 in 5 countries on the day it was launched, and just won Best Indie Biographies and Memoirs from Kirkus. Welcome, Mag. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Well, Meg, from looking at your website, it seems like you have lived a very adventurous life.
That's right. That's why the book got written. I felt compelled at the advanced age of about 68 or whatever it was when I started that I said now is the time to share, some of the experiences I've had and to put it out there and inspire people to go out and explore the world. That was really the motivation initially.
Wonderful.
Great. So can you give us a little synopsis of your book?
I had the original idea was to make it a series of travel essays and to have each essay be distinct unto itself. So in other words, there'd be an essay about Italy and there would be an essay about France and there'd be an essay. And then I would explain my adventures. I would talk about all the things that I had learned. I would talk everything from food to art to people and all the rest of it. And as I started, and I used all these journals that I had kept throughout my adventures, so I had good raw material. And as I started putting this together, literally members of my family started to show up in my head and wanted to be a part of the picture. And I realized that I really had to talk about my past. I had to talk about what had influenced me even as a young child, a young girl, and led me to have this insatiable curiosity to travel. So it's like that told me that I had to make it more complicated. So instead of being a selection of travel essays, it became travel narratives, then interwoven with backstory material that had everything to do with my childhood and my eccentric family and all the difficulties that I endured throughout my young years.
So I see that you're a writer before writing this book. So was this a difficult process for you?
Well, I've been writing all my life. Mm-hmm. When I first went to Europe, I was 11 or so. Wow. when I first went. My mother, stepfather, and I went to Italy. I kept a journal. My stepfather gave me a beautiful leather journal. I started to write in it every day. And I wrote about my reflections, my thoughts, my complaints, my angst. And I developed this amazing habit of keeping a journal. I went through 2 journals and then I just kept on going. When I came back from living in Europe, I still kept a journal. And then later on in my life, when I started all my traveling, I always took a notebook with me and dutifully reported all the stuff that I was witnessing. So it became like a discipline of mine to, keep this material intact because I knew I'd never remember all of it.
Sure.
Right. So you actually started writing the book when you were 11?
Well, that's what I've told people when I've done readings. I'll tell them I actually have my old journals from my childhood. I still have them in my possession.
That's pretty cool.
I hold one up to people and I say, this book was given to me when I was 11 years old. And this is the beginning of Bowing to Elephants. This is the beginning of it. And because I believed in the importance of the stuff I was recording, that, ultimately, when I got the courage up and, to make a book, I had all this wonderful, material. So it was kind of great.
Right. So my parents used to travel a lot, and my mom always kept a journal of what their trip was, who they ate lunch with, the tour that they went on, the name of the tour guide. And it's amazing when you go back and read it. It's unbelievable, the whole story of their trip. And then I think back to trips that Leah and I have taken, and we're like, remember that time we went to Key West? Sort of, but not really. We look at a couple of pictures. So it really is important to write down things that happen in your life. You forget them so quickly.
Yeah, you do. And when I was using this material, there was even still that difficulty I had when composing the book, where I realized that there were more things in my experience that I knew I couldn't remember, and so I had to kind of sit with this material and kind of travel back in time in my head in quietly and be able to conjure up the physical experiences so that then I could remember more details, that I could,
Sure.
or in fact, actually invent details that were consistent with the scene that had been set.
Right. It sounds like an interesting adventure of being able to sit down and look back at so much of your life.
Yeah, well, it was great. I figured, that it was about time that I'm a Buddhist practitioner, and my teacher and I were talking one day. He and I are exactly the same age, actually. And I was telling him about wanting to write a book, and he was talking about wanting to do something. And finally he said to me, we're of an age where we've got to stop talking about doing things and actually do them, because everything is uncertain in life.
Sure.
We certainly know that at this moment in history more,
Yes.
more vividly than anything. And so, yeah, stop planning for it and just sit down and do it. And I made myself a promise that I would start the book and finish it by the time I had my 70th birthday, which is actually exactly what I did.
Great.
I actually was able to do that. Yeah.
So how did you decide to do that? Did you allow yourself a certain amount of hours per day, or did you just let it flow?
Well, I had a hard time being disciplined with my time because I wasn't working for a living, so I didn't have a lot of structure as some people do who have a job and various other things that they have to take care of. So when you have a lot of free time, you tend to not be very disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
However, I joined a group. This is what saved me and what helped the book emerge. And this is a group of people that I knew from when I lived in northern New Mexico. There's two teachers of writing that I knew, and they started a course, and it's a long distance course, and so they carry it on, over internet and all that, and it goes on for 9 months.
Wow.
And it's the goal of the course is to help you finish a book.
Great.
So everybody that joins the course has a different project in mind, of course. And then everybody works together, and there's all different ways that the people in the course interact with one another and also support one another in their efforts. So it was a great kind of container of support for the struggling writer, for the writer who didn't have a good sense of discipline about timing, or got scared when they sat down to write and would think, oh, this is all nonsense and nobody really cares, which is the typical sort of monster that dwells in the head of writers, And so I took this course for 2 years, actually. I took it twice. And at the end of taking it twice, I'd finished the book.
Great.
Oh,
It's a great course, and I don't mind putting a plug in for them.
Sure.
It's called Right to the Finish.
oh,
Oh,
excellent.
I like that name.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's they're two very, very smart young people who are writers and talented in other ways, but they came up with an ingenious plan, and they've done it for 15 years, and
Wonderful.
they've helped numerous writers get their thing off the ground. And I was so grateful, and I always want to mention them in public because I want people to know about them.
Right. That's great that they've been doing that for 15 years. We'll put a link to their webpage in the show notes.
Yeah, there's Sean Murphy and Tanya Cassell, but if you Googled Right to the Finish, you'd find it. It would be online, and they're very worthy of support. And they're hardworking young people who are, like many people, scrambling around trying to figure out all kinds of creative ways to make a living.
Right.
Well, thank you for telling our audience about them.
Well, Meg, after you finished the course, what was the next step to getting the book published?
Well, then I hadn't had enough of group interaction, so I took a course also in marketing from them, and so I learned a little. They were running a course on marketing for writers who had actually finished their books. It didn't kind of catapult me into success, but it gave me some tips and gave me sort of the lay of the land about what the marketing world was like. And I knew from the beginning that I was not going to be able to place my book with an agent, that it was too personal. It didn't have a blockbuster sort of subject matter. And in consultation with them, I figured out I had to go my own route and try to find an independent publisher to publish the book. And then I spent a long time, really a long time, researching independent publishers, reaching out to them, all kinds of things, and with very little kind of, bubbling up of interest. And I encountered a woman at a writing conference in San Francisco where I live, and she's the publisher of She Writes Press. They were doing a panel discussion about independent publishers, and I listened to her. And I listened to her presentation, and I listened to some of the others, and I really liked what she had to say. And they're what they call a hybrid publisher. It's sort of the cross between self-publishing and traditional publishing.
Okay.
I applied to have them publish my book, and they took it right away. They were very happy to take it. The pluses for me, they allow you to take part in the design of your book. So in other words, you take part in how it's going to look. It's very hands-on.
Good, that's
you,
very
the writer,
important.
and you have a project manager and all the rest of it. They have distribution capacity through Ingram Publisher Services, so you don't have to jump through all kinds of hoops to get your book distributed, because it's distributed everywhere as an independently published book. The only thing they don't do is they don't do PR for you. They don't get out there and advertise you,
Sure.
But that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But everything about the whole process of doing it was a great learning experience, and and I felt I had control over what I was doing and what my book was going to look like.
Yes, that's wonderful.
We can put a link to them in the show notes too.
She Writes Press, yeah, they're a great organization, and they actually got an award, I think, last year for best independent publisher in the country.
Wow.
So they've got a good reputation, and they have a very strong community of writers that all stay connected to one another. So I feel like I have tons of fellow writers who know what I've been through, and we communicate through a Facebook page. Some of us have made friends.
Let's talk about marketing.
Well, that's the ugliest subject of all, frankly.
Everyone says that. Many authors say that.
Well, here's my question. How did you hit number 1 in 5 countries on the day your book was launched?
I went through a whole journey of misfirings with publicists, and I had two different publicists. For traditional publicists that actually didn't really do their job properly. And then I landed with this fellow that I actually knew from a past job experience, who had developed a career in helping people market things. And he's very inventive and clever. So he started to work for me as sort of my representative. He wouldn't call himself a publicist. He sort of called himself, the marketing guy or whatever. So then he developed a strategy of how we were going to get this thing out there. There were clever ways to get to number 1 on the day that your book is launched. And it has to do with giving it away for 24 hours for starters. There's a strategy that you can use on Amazon where you do this for 24 hours and your numbers go way up because everybody loves something free.
Yes.
And it got rated very highly in foreign countries. It got rated very highly in Europe. And that's where it got, I think, the highest ratings, as I remember, because of this campaign we did with Amazon. It was a bestseller for a very short period of time. It has been selling well since. And the things that I do now to help it are I'm doing a lot of interviews. I'm getting connections made for me with a lot of different people to keep speaking up about my book, and it helps the sales of the book. I'm going to do a bunch of Facebook Live things. I've done a whole social media campaign that has sort of some of the time driven me crazy because I'm sort of an old style person who finds social media sometimes highly aggravating. But yes, it's a very useful vehicle, as everybody knows. Mm-hmm. I've done a bunch of readings. I made a point of going on a little bit of a book thing where I went to a number of different places and did, live, in-person readings.
How did you decide where you were going to do the readings?
The most logical choice when I launched the book was to read in my home community. And so I live in San Francisco. So I chose a bookstore that was very representative of the Bay Area. It was called Book Passage, and we had our launch event at that bookstore. And between them and myself, I managed to draw an audience of about 75 people.
Wow, wonderful.
So that was kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Then I went and did a reading in Taos, New Mexico, where I used to live, and which is mentioned in the book in places, and is very literary, creative community. And I knew that people would really turn out for a reading there, and so I did that. I went to LA and did a reading down there at a Buddhist community. Again, invited by the person who ran that community, because there's a strong thread in the book about my journey into Buddhism.
Okay.
And so that made sense for me to share the book with people who are steeped in that, in those teachings.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I did LA, and then I did another one in the Bay Area, south of San Francisco, at another bookstore. It takes time to get people to pay attention to you. Cities are the places that have a lot of, that have the possibility of independent bookstores anymore. I mean, there are a sprinkling of them in less populated communities, but certainly cities are your best bet if you want,
Sure.
a choice. And I really love the idea of supporting independent bookstores, blowing the horn for them and saying, this is where I want my book to be sold.
Right.
I mean, I always will tell people they can get it on Amazon, but my first choice is always to say, go to your independent bookstore and buy it there, because the bookstores need the support.
Yeah, our small town in Ohio has a bookstore called the Learned Owl, and they have been around for a long time, and we're very proud that they're still here in our town and selling books.
I grew up in a day when there were many more of those kinds of bookstores,
Mm-hmm.
and they were really places of community where people felt like they were coming together with one
Sure.
another. Our world is so fractured and so kind of chaotic that there's a lot of comfort to be, had in going into a bookstore and sitting down and listen to somebody read to you,
This episode of the Author Inside You podcast is brought to you by Scribophile. It's a great writing resource if you're looking for beta readers. So I'm part of a writers group on Facebook, and one of the other members was asking about getting some beta readers for some of her work. So I naturally suggested Scribophile, and she had this to say.
I posted a story last night after gaining enough karma points by providing a critique, and received my first critique on a creative nonfiction piece this morning.
Now that is fast. You sign up for Scribophile at night, you give a critique to somebody else's work, you gain enough karma points, you upload one of your works, and already you have a beta reader that you're looking for. That's pretty cool.
You might be asking, what are karma points? Well, you earn them by critiquing other works or having members like and react to your critiques. If you leave a critique for a community member, you will gain karma points. And then if other community members read your critique and think that you are doing a good job, they can react to it and you can earn even more karma points.
If you're looking for beta readers and a critique of your work, check out Scribophile at scribophile.com. Well, Mag, do you have any advice that you could give somebody who's working on a book now and maybe they're not quite finished with it?
First of all, just know that you have a story worth telling. Just remind yourself that you have a story worth telling, that everybody
Right.
has a story.
We all do.
And, the doubts you have are unreal. They're just simply the busyness of your mind getting in the way. And you really need to set those difficulties aside and forge ahead, because there's nothing more satisfying than completing something that's your own, creative project. It's a manifestation of who you are. It's a lonely business. And so I remind people that they need to share the experience with other writers, and they need to maybe find a writing group or a writing community of some kind. I mean, I finished my book because I worked with these people over that period of time.
Right. What was the feeling like when your first book arrived and you were able to hold it, like the very first edition that you got to see?
It was pretty exciting. I mean, I even got excited when I saw the advanced reader copy. And, because I got a whole box of those to give away and send to people and whatnot. And I couldn't believe it. It was like I just kept this box open in my living room, and I just kept looking at it and thinking, my God, this is something I did, and I gave it away to people periodically, people that I really like.
Sure, that's very exciting to be able to hand the book to somebody and say, I wrote this.
And people are universally touched by that. When you do that, when you offer that up. My aunt, who was dying, and I went to see her. That was last year in March, I believe, and I had the advanced reader copy for her, and I gave it to her. She was a writer throughout her life, and she was so thrilled to get the copy of the book.
Sure, I bet. You're her niece.
Yeah.
And then she called me up and left me this long, wonderful message about how touched she was to have read it. And you're giving a piece of yourself, out. You're putting that out into the great unknown. But it's also, you have those wonderful occasions when you can do it personally and actually just hand it off to somebody and say, hey, I want you to have this.
But it's exciting when you say, I know somebody who's an author and they wrote this book and here it is on my coffee table.
Yeah, and then you do that, you get that spread around enough, and then then the word of mouth thing starts to happen, and then occasionally I get emails from people people I don't know who've mentioned, that the book moved them or touched them in a certain way, and that's a remarkable feeling. To just someone you've never laid eyes on to tell you that you've actually helped change their thinking, or made them feel a certain way.
Well, that goes back to when you're talking about the people who are writing and you don't know who you're going to touch. You don't know who will read this and change their life. So it is very interesting.
Right. Yeah. It's all sort of mysterious because you really don't know. It's an act of faith when you send it out into the world that it's going to reach a lot of people and it's going to mean something to a lot of people. And so far, I feel the response has been really wonderful. And, I've given up wanting to, I never did want to be anybody who was famous, but I've given up caring about whether, about getting a New York Times book review or anything like that. It's enough to get the kind of good trade reviews I got. Kirkus gave me a star before the book was published, they had reviewed it, and that was a big boost for me.
Did you send the book to them? How did you get that review?
I sent it to them, yeah. Our publishing company, She Writes, they told us about how you can get advanced reviews, a list of trade journals, in a sense, who are known to give very intelligent, thoughtful reviews that people pay attention to. And, in most cases, you have to pay something to get them to do it. And so I took a chance and sent it off to 4 different places. And I was lucky, and I was happy that all the reviews I got were very positive.
That's great.
Some people feel like that there's something not quite so right about paying people to review your book. But here's the thing, if it helps you have exposure for the book down the line, then it's not a bad thing to do that.
Right, you can reach more people.
Sure, it's marketing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It is marketing. So that, in a sense, is, even though I hadn't thought of that originally, that is also a marketing tool, is to get trade reviews. You have to, hope and pray that you get good reviews. You're not going to, if you don't get a good review, you're not going to use it, right. Of course. But I felt very, very fortunate that the reviews I got were very good. So
it seems like you've done a lot of cool things. So congratulations.
I have. Thank you. Yeah, it's fun to spread it around and then tell people about it and remind people that they can go out and have an adventure too.
Sure.
I think the curious mind is a very great, wonderful asset in a human being, and that's something my grandmother had, and it's something I've always had, and it's a lot of the travel happens because one is curious about the rest of the world,
Sure.
Right. Well, yeah. Meg, that's a perfect place to end. So thank you very much for that advice. You've been a great guest.
Well, thank you. I'm very glad to have had the chance to talk to you.
We hope you enjoyed Mag's interview as much as we did.
And if you have a friend who might find it interesting, please share this episode with them. And until next time,
right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.